نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Previously, the purpose behind Ramadan is not simply to go hungry and thirsty, but rather it is to acquire the state of God consciousness, taqwa. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us clear instruction in relation to the purpose behind our fasting, which makes the goal behind our fasting clear and attainable. Why? Because it's understood. And so now we have to ask ourselves the question, how do I acquire that state? How do I become a God-conscious person, a person who is aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the month of Ramadan? And the first most important point is, of course, the fasting itself, as-siyam. And in Arabic, siyam is basically to abstain, al-imsak. It's to abstain from food, drink, and intimacy with the spouse, from sunrise until sunset. And perhaps a point which is clear to most of us, but for those of us that may be new to Ramadan or new to fasting, it's important to bear in mind that we start fasting as soon as the Fajr prayer comes in. As soon as the Fajr prayer comes in, ideally, we would hear the adhan of Fajr. But unfortunately for us, as Muslims living as a minority, we do not yet hear the adhan called out loudly. We don't hear it, unfortunately. And it's a great loss on our behalf, because the adhan, it brings peace to the heart. And it brings healing to the heart, hearing the adhan 5 times a day. And it reminds the Muslim of his or her purpose as he is going through his day. The adhan cuts through the day of the middle of the day or the evening and so on and so forth. It's a reminder. But the point, the fasting starts at the beginning of the Fajr time, when the adhan comes in, not when the iqamah starts, as sometimes this is a misunderstanding that some who are new to fasting have. And from the moment that the adhan comes in, I abstain from eating, drinking, intimacy until sunset, i.e. until the adhan of Maghrib. Until the adhan of Maghrib. Therefore, I should not eat until Maghrib time has come in. If Maghrib comes in at 6:09, I do not eat until 6:09. I do not eat until 6:09. It's important, because if I accidentally eat too early, I have to make that day up. I have to make that day up, even though it's a mistake. It's a mistake due to negligence. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He forgives and He overlooks forgetfulness, but negligence has to be compensated for. So, to abstain. But it's not only to abstain from food and from drink and from intimacy with the spouse. It is to abstain from that which we engage in of dunya with our hearts. And in order to do that, I have to fast or go beyond fasting with my stomach and that which is below my stomach. And I have to start to fast with my eyes. And I have to start to fast with my ears. And I have to start to fast with my tongue. I.e., I lower my gaze from that which I should not be looking at, or from that which will take me away from the purpose of Ramadan, which is piety, which is God consciousness. And so if a person usually watches things they should not be watching outside of the month of Ramadan, inside of the month of Ramadan, they should put extra effort into abstaining from watching those things. And the hope is that when Ramadan ends, they no longer watch those things anyway, because Ramadan has provided them with a platform to stop doing that which they should not be doing. Likewise, if a person watches things that they are allowed to watch, things which are mubah, but in line with the goal of life, i.e. to worship Allah and to acquire a place in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's paradise and to please Him, in line with that goal, these things are considered a waste of time, such as watching videos about random things, reading things which are not important. Then a person during the month of Ramadan should try to cut those things out as well. And rather than fill his or her time with those petty things, fill his or her time with the recitation of the Quran, with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with salah, and so on and so forth. Likewise, a person needs to go beyond fasting with the stomach and that which is below the stomach, and fast with the ears. And so I should not be listening to haram during the month of Ramadan. If I have a problem with music, for example, the contemporary forms of music, without a shadow of a doubt, all of the ulama would be in agreement that they are haram. There will not be a discussion about the type of music that people listen to today. And so during the month of Ramadan, I should definitely stop listening. Outside of the month of Ramadan, I should aspire towards not listening to music. Inside of the month of Ramadan, I should not be listening at all. And I should use it again as a platform to stop outside of the month of Ramadan. And inside of the month of Ramadan, there is an incentive. Replace it with Quran. It's easier. Why? Because I am fasting. I am in a constant state of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with my body. And so it's easier to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with my ears, with my eyes. And so I should abstain from listening to that which I should not be listening to. Music. Backbiting. If someone is backbiting someone else, I should not be listening. The sin of backbiting, it's a major sin and it's a problem, because many of us, we do not realize we're sinning when we engage in this sin. Speaking about other people and listening to the one who speaks about other people. And the general rule is, if someone speaks to you about another person, that person will very easily speak about you to someone else. Because the person who likes to backbite does not pick and choose who they backbite about. They have a problem, an addiction to speaking about others. And it shows a weakness of character. A person who likes to talk about other people, it shows a weakness of this person's character. Especially for men. Especially for men. A man who backbites and gossips, it's unmanly. It's unmanly. And so in the month of Ramadan, if someone starts to speak about someone else to me, I should say no. I'm fasting. I should say no. And for many of us, it's difficult to stop someone from backbiting. Why? Because we feel we don't want to offend them. But it's better you offend the person than offending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you offend them the first time, hopefully, they won't engage in it the second time. And be wary of those who backbite in the name of Islam. Be wary of those who backbite in the name of Islam. They backbite in the name of warning against those who should not be listened to, or those who have problems in their deen, and so on and so forth. That's the job of the ulama, a select 99.9% of the ummah. Especially if those who are warning in the name of Islam are not even considered to be ulama, but perhaps they wear the clothing of ulama, imams or du'at or students of knowledge. They are not qualified to warn against others. And previously within our deen, when we had a system in place, a system of judging others, if a person were to backbite about another, they would be lashed. If this was taken to a court, if a person were to accuse someone of something and it proves that it's not true, they would be lashed. And so we have to be careful in the month of Ramadan, just as we are supposed to be careful outside of the month of Ramadan, but even more so. The third, our tongues. Just as we shouldn't listen to backbiting, we should not be engaging in backbiting. I should not engage in backbiting, just as I should not be listening to backbiting. And the Prophet ﷺ, he instructed us about backbiting, and he said that it is to mention that about your brother which he does not want to be mentioned, regardless whether it's true or not true. And many of us, we fall into this trap. We say, I'll say it to his face. I'll say it to her face. It doesn't matter. It's backbiting. It's haram. And you may go the entire day and you're hungry and thirsty, but you've broken your fast with the meat of your brother or sister in Islam. Why? Because of your tongue. And what's worse is namima. Namima, gossiping. He said, she said. Going from one person and informing another about what that person said about them. Oh, I heard this person said this about you. I'm only warning you. I'm a good friend. I want you to know. No, you're not a good friend. You're a bad friend. Why? Because you are going to cause a split within the community. And if you really cared about the person, you would defend their honor and you would say, don't talk about the person and they're not present. And you would protect the feelings of the one who you care about or you claim to care about. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in a very famous hadith, I want to meet my companions and my chest is clear. I want to meet my companions and my chest is clear, meaning I don't have any ill thoughts about anyone. And that should be the state of the heart of the Muslim. Namima can destroy a family, can destroy a community, can destroy a society. And it's a word, but sometimes words are more painful than that which is inflicted physically. We have to be very careful with our tongues. So we should be fasting with our eyes, be fasting with our ears, be fasting with our tongues. And what about with our hearts? There is fasting to be done with the heart. And fasting with the heart, it means to abstain from that which is unrelated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the akhirah. And of course, this is a challenge. It's a challenge for a person who lives in a society which is obsessed with the material and worldly life that we currently reside within. And that's the point behind Ramadan. It's mujahadatun nafs, fasting the day, praying the night, reciting the Quran throughout the day and the night, giving charity, all to condition ourselves to be attached to the next life rather than this life. And so I should try to consciously keep my heart clear of the dunya. I start to think about wealth, not this month. I start to think about my desires, not this month. I start to think about that which relates to this life. I say to myself, not this month. I'm going to focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to focus on acquiring a place with Him. I'm going to focus on acquiring a consciousness of Him at all times. And then we come to the stomach, and of course, the stomach, we abstain from food and drink during the daytime. But what about during the nighttime? For many of us, we make up that which we don't eat in the day, in the night, which beats the purpose of fasting. It beats the purpose of fasting. At the end of the month of Ramadan, we are supposed to give Sadaqah. We're supposed to give charity to those who are less well off than us. So therefore, during the month, we should not be wasting food, making food and throwing it away because we can't eat it, spending too much money on different types of foods, and becoming greedy. And a problem here, iftar parties. Iftar parties. Yes, it's good to break our fast with others, but not if it is contradicting the purpose behind the month of Ramadan. We attend an iftar party, we overeat, we become lazy, we can't pray tarawih together, etc. No. Likewise, the night time is to be utilized for prayer. Therefore, I should not be traveling around London looking for the nicest sounding reciter, etc. No. Find your local masjid, pray in your local masjid, focus on the Quran, not the sound of the reciter. Does the sound of the reciter make a difference? It does, of course. But ultimately, we should be focusing on the meaning of the Quran. The meaning of the Quran is the most important aspect. And if I'm staying up all night, traveling around and eating and going to this restaurant and so on and so forth, and then I'm sleeping during the day, it beats the purpose behind fasting. Which leads to the following point. during the day to make sure that I'm not sleeping during the day whilst fasting. I'm not sleeping and wasting the opportunity of worship, of remembrance, of recitation of the Quran away. That's not the point of fasting. The point of fasting is to feel the weakness, to feel the fact that we are dependent, and so on and so forth. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. The purpose behind fasting, as we said, to acquire God consciousness, and that which has been put into the month of Ramadan by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are components which are conducive of such a purpose. Abstaining from eating and drinking, praying the nights, reciting the Quran. And it's important that we understand how this leads to God consciousness, taqwa, and what taqwa is. The reason that we are able to acquire taqwa in the month of Ramadan is because we have a clear purpose. We know what we're doing. This month is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from me within this month, I don't eat and drink, I don't engage in intimacy during the daytime, I pray at night time, I read the Quran, and so we engage in those things. And whilst abstaining from eating and drinking, we are constantly saying no to the self, even though it may be a subconscious no. It may be a subconscious no. You're not going to eat, you're not going to drink, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. And so we condition ourselves to put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before ourselves. We put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before the nafs. And so if we were to look at the example of Ramadan and try to apply it to the rest of our lives, what do we need to do to be people of taqwa outside of the month of Ramadan? Firstly, in the month of Ramadan, we know what we're doing. Therefore, outside of the month of Ramadan, we need to know what we are doing. We need to have an understanding of what it is that we are trying to do with this life and how do we do it. Most of us, we know the rulings that pertain to the month of Ramadan. And so outside of the month of Ramadan, we need to learn the rulings which pertain to our everyday lives, so that we know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us in the situations that we face. And thirdly, inside of the month of Ramadan, we condition ourselves to say no. Likewise, outside of the month of Ramadan, being able to say no. And not only being able to say no to the haram, but being able to say no to the halal. Why? Because I'm living for a higher purpose. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created man as a creature which requires purpose. Without purpose, man cannot exist in his full capacity. Man has to have a purpose. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us and He informs us of the purpose very clearly in the Quran. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, I have not created jinn and man except but to worship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the bigger picture when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He told the angels, I am going to place on this earth a khalifa, someone to deputize, someone to carry out the instruction of Allah Azza wa Jal. That's our purpose here. That's our purpose. And for the reason that we have lost our purpose today, we find many of us, we are wandering and we fall into the pits of depression. We fall into the pits of consumerism, materialism, becoming zombies that live and consume without a reason for the consumption. And so Ramadan, it's a way of waking us up. It's a way of waking us up. And it's very important that we focus on being woken up in Ramadan by following the points that were mentioned. To abstain from that which is haram with the eyes, the ears, the tongue. To abstain from that which is mubah sometimes, that which is halal, permissible, for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside the month of Ramadan. To pray the nights, i.e. Taraweeh. To fast the days. To recite the Quran and try to focus on the meaning behind the Quran. For a person who is unable to understand the Quran, read the Quran in Arabic, yes, but also pick up the Quran in a language that you understand and read. Read. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send the book to us for it to be recited with a nice melody and tune, without understanding of the instruction. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Quran to us to be understood and to be applied. As the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Quranu hujjatun lak aw alayk. He said the Quran is an evidence for you or against you. How can it be an evidence except that it has to be understood? And so, Shahru Ramadan, the month within which the Quran was revealed, is a month to understand the Quran and to reattach to the Quran. Don't let this month pass except that you are understanding the Quran, you're reading from it. And there is no excuse, we have non-Muslims who read the Quran in its entirety and then they embrace Islam. We have individuals that have completed the Quran in a language they understand multiple times within the last year or two. And this is one of the blessings that we have here in the UK and in Europe and in the Western world, that we are a people who can read without much effort. In many parts of the world, illiteracy is at a high rate. In some Muslim countries, over 50% of the population are illiterate. And so we should not take the gift of being able to read for granted. Read. And the best thing to read during the month of Ramadan and outside of the month of Ramadan is the Quran. It's the Quran. If you do not have the Quran, you have a smart device. Read the Quran on the smart device. Utilize the month, so that perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wakens our hearts up and we become people attached to Him outside of the month of Ramadan, and we are used for the greater purpose of that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees fit. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وارض اللهم عن أبي بكر وعن عمر وعن عثمان وعن علي وعن سائر الصحابة أجمعين اللهم تب علينا واعف عنا إنك أنت العفو الكريم اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا واعف عنا إنك أنت العفو الكريم اللهم بلغنا رمضان يا رب العالمين وتقبل منا الصيام والقيام يا مجيب الدعوات اللهم اجعلنا من الصائمين القائمين التالين لكتابك يا رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة.